The end of the survey vessel Stellara was not a glorious explosion or a valiant last stand. It was a sickening, metallic scream as the ship's gravitic stabilizers tore themselves apart under the strain of an uncharted planet's magnetic anomaly. For the 3 Cathar aboard, it was a cascade of failures. Alarms blaring in dissonant chords, the gentle amber lighting of the bridge flashing a violent, accusatory crimson, and the lurch of artificial gravity surrendering to the real thing. Xyler, the mission's senior diplomat, felt his 4 slender arms flail as he was thrown against his console. The fine, crystalline filaments of his uniform snagged and tore. Across the bridge, Lyra, their xenobotanist, was a frozen sculpture of terror, her large, multifaceted eyes wide with 1,000 fractured reflections of the chaos. Kale, the security officer, was braced against a bulkhead, his usually stoic carapace emitting a low thrum of distress, the bioluminescent patterns on his skin flickering from a calm azure to a frantic, mottled purple. Then came the impact, a rending, crushing finale that plunged them into darkness and silence, a silence more terrifying than the preceding noise. When consciousness returned, it was to the hiss of emergency seals failing and the scent of ozone mixed with something else. Something rich, wet, and alive. Kale was the first to stir, his training overriding his panic. He forced open the buckled hatch, and the jungle of xylos flooded in. It was a world painted in shades of nightmare and wonder. Towering, fungal-like trees with caps that pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence cast the forest floor in a perpetual twilight of greens and violets. The air was thick, a humid blanket that tasted of chlorophyll and decay. Vines thick as a Cathar's torso snaked around everything, some studded with thorns like obsidian glass. The ground was a soft, spongy carpet of moss that glowed a faint, sickly yellow. And then came the sounds. A low, guttural chittering from the canopy above. The wet snap of something large moving through the undergrowth just beyond their sight. And then, a sound that vibrated through the very marrow of their bones. A deep, resonant roar that was less a noise and more a physical pressure wave. It was a declaration of hunger, of territory, of absolute, unquestioned power. Lyra whimpered, a high-pitched trill that was the Cathar equivalent of a sob. The patterns on her skin shifted to a chaotic mess of warning reds and fearful yellows. "By the silent stars," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What was that?" Kale had his sidearm drawn, a sleek energy weapon that suddenly felt like a child's toy. "Stay in the wreckage," he commanded, his voice tight. "It is the only hard cover we have." Xyler, his diplomatic composure shattered, could only nod, his gaze sweeping the oppressive, living walls of the jungle that surrounded them. Their translator pendants, small discs worn on their chests, were thankfully still functional, but there was no one to talk to. Their comms were dead. Their ship was a tomb of twisted metal. They were alone. Prey. The roar came again, closer this time. It was answered by a series of high-pitched shrieks from a different direction. The jungle was a symphony of death, and they were the uninvited audience. Panic, cold, and absolute began to set in. They were Cathar. Their civilization had conquered disease, poverty, and war. They lived in sterile, perfectly controlled orbital habitats. They hadn't contended with a true predator in 10,000 years. Their instincts for such things had atrophied, replaced by logic and procedure. And right now, logic dictated that their odds of survival were statistically indistinguishable from zero. As the third roar echoed, shaking the very leaves from the trees, a new sound cut through their terror. It was faint at first, rhythmic and mundane, a soft, scraping noise. Wit, wit, wit. Xyler's audio enhancers focused on the sound. It was coming from a small clearing not 50 paces from their crash site. Peering through a gap in the foliage, he saw it. A fire. A small, controlled fire, its orange light a defiant pinprick against the alien twilight. And beside it, a figure. It was bipedal but stockier than a Cathar with only 2 arms. It was covered in some kind of primitive-looking fabric, tough and utilitarian. The creature was hunched over a piece of wood, using a knife to shave off thin curls. It seemed completely, utterly unbothered by the sounds that were currently liquefying the Cathar's courage. As the terrifying shriek sounded again, this time almost directly overhead, the figure didn't even flinch. It simply paused, looked up into the canopy with a look of mild annoyance, and then went back to its whittling. "What is it?" Lyra hissed, her curiosity warring with her fear. "I don't know," Xyler breathed, mesmerized. "Its vessel must have crashed as well, but it seems so calm." The creature finished sharpening its stick into a wicked-looking point. It stood, stretched with a soft grunt, and then turned its head, its pale face and strangely small eyes seeming to look directly at their hiding spot. A thin, unsettling smile touched its lips. It raised one of its two hands in a gesture that was clearly not hostile, and its voice, filtered and flattened by the translator, reached them. "Evening, neighbors. Bit of a noisy neighborhood, isn't it? Hope you don't mind the fire. It tends to keep the things that shriek from getting too curious." The three Cathar stared, their advanced intellects struggling to process the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the situation. They were stranded on a death world, surrounded by apex predators, and their only fellow survivor was a primitive biped who was acting like he was on a camping trip. The human, Alex Ryder, had been tracking the atmospheric disturbance for a day. His own ship, a long-range ecological scout called the Wanderer, was a relic, but a tough one. He'd managed to ride the magnetic wave down to a semi-controlled crash in a riverbed a few kilometers away, saving most of his gear. He'd been setting up a long-term camp when the Cathar vessel, sleek and clearly more advanced, had simply fallen out of the sky. He'd approached cautiously, smelling the ozone and seeing the wreckage. He'd decided against making immediate contact. Panicked people were dangerous people, regardless of species. Better to let them stew a bit, get a measure of them. So he'd gone back to his camp, started a fire, and began work on a spear. The roars and shrieks were just background noise to him. He'd spent 2 years cataloging the megafauna of Kepler 186f. This place, Xylos, was loud, but it wasn't anything he hadn't handled before. He watched now as the three aliens emerged cautiously from their broken ship. They were tall and slender, moving with an unnerving grace, their 4 arms held close to their bodies. Their skin was the most fascinating part. It was a canvas of shifting light, a living display of their emotions. Right now, it was a discordant symphony of fear yellow and alert purple. The one in the lead, who held himself with an air of authority despite the terror shimmering on his skin, approached. "I am Xyler of the Cathar Concordance. This is our science officer, Lyra, and security officer, Kale. We are grateful for your non-hostile greeting." Alex leaned his newly sharpened spear against a log. "Alex Ryder, human, and you're welcome. Figured you had enough problems without me adding to them. Come on, get close to the fire. The smoke messes with the olfactory senses of the smaller predators." Kale kept his weapon raised, his posture stiff. "How can you be so unaffected? Did you not hear those vocalizations?" Alex tossed another log onto the fire, sending a shower of sparks into the humid air. "Hear them? Hard to miss. The big one with the roar I'm calling a grave maw until I get a better look at its teeth. The ones in the trees are shriekers, probably pack hunters, judging by the call and response. Nasty, but they seem to be afraid of fire." He said it all with the casual air of a naturalist discussing pigeons in a park. Lyra's scientific mind latched onto the data, a small anchor in her sea of fear. The patterns on her skin shifted to include flecks of curious blue. "You have already begun cataloging them." "First rule of survival," Alex said, picking up another stick. "Know thy neighbor, especially when thy neighbor wants to eat you." He gestured with his knife toward the logs he'd arranged around the fire. "Have a seat. You look like you've had a rough day. I was about to make dinner." The word dinner seemed to hang in the air. For the Cathar, sustenance was a matter of nutrient paste and hydroponically grown flora, consumed in sterile environments. The concept of making dinner in the middle of this primordial nightmare, with monsters roaring in the dark, was so alien it bordered on insanity. Xyler exchanged a look with his companions. Logic told him this human was their best chance of survival. Instinct, an instinct he barely knew he possessed, screamed that anyone this calm in this much danger was something to be deeply, deeply feared. With great hesitation they sat, their elegant forms looking profoundly out of place on the rough-hewn logs. They watched as Alex pulled a small, metallic pot from his pack, filled it with water from a canteen, and set it on the fire to boil. He moved with an economy of motion, a practiced ease that spoke of countless hours spent in places just like this. The jungle screamed again, and the Cathar flinched as one. Alex didn't even look up. Yeah, we hear you," he muttered to the darkness. "You'll get your turn." The first few hours were a study in contrasts. The Cathar sat rigid, their multifaceted eyes scanning the impenetrable wall of darkness beyond the firelight, their bodies tensing with every snap of a twig or distant call. Their skin was a constant, flickering broadcast of anxiety. Xyler tried to engage Alex in a conversation about their respective technological capabilities, hoping to find some common ground, but Alex seemed more interested in the properties of the local woods. "This stuff is dense," Alex commented, holding up a piece of dark, purple-hued wood. "Resinous, too, probably burns hot and long once it gets going, good for banking the fire overnight." Lyra, ever the scientist, couldn't help but be drawn in. "Our analysis indicated the majority of flora on this planet is silicon-based. That would account for the density." "Silicon-based? Huh." Alex tapped the wood with his knife. It made a sound like ceramic. "Explains why my axe was having such a hard time. Well, you learn something new every day." He seemed genuinely pleased by this discovery, as if it were a fun fact rather than a piece of data critical to their survival. Meanwhile, Kale remained on high alert, his sidearm never wavering. "Your casualness is unsettling," he finally stated, his translator rendering the Cathar words into flat, accusatory English. "It is an illogical response to the tactical situation." Alex looked up from the small pouch of rations he was opening. He gave Kale a wry smile. "Panic is also an illogical response. It burns calories, clouds judgment, and makes you look like a wounded animal. And out here, looking like a wounded animal is a great way to end up as someone's midnight snack." He poured a dry, grain-like substance into the boiling water, stirring it with a stick. "Look, on my homeworld Earth, we have places like this. Not exactly like this, granted. Our trees are mostly carbon and our apex predators are a little less vocal. But the principle is the same. The universe doesn't care if you're scared. It just is. You either adapt to it or it eats you. Freaking out about it doesn't change the outcome, it just makes the whole experience less pleasant." This simple, brutal philosophy seemed to stun the Cathar into silence. Their civilization was built on the principle of bending the universe to their will, of controlling every variable. The idea of simply accepting a hostile environment and working within its lethal rules was utterly foreign. "You speak as if this is normal," Xyler said, the lights on his skin swirling in confused lavender patterns. "It is," Alex replied matter-of-factly. "For my species, anyway. We grew up on a planet that actively tried to kill us for a few million years. Earthquakes, volcanoes, ice ages, predators, plagues. You name it, we've survived it. We're a species of janitors, cleaning up after disasters and moving on. Being calm in a crisis isn't a personality trait. It's a survival mechanism hardwired into our DNA." He portioned the rehydrated mush into 3 empty ration tins and handed one to each of them. "Here, it's not great, but it's calories. Eat up. We've got a lot to do tomorrow." The Cathar looked down at the bland-smelling paste. It was sustenance and they were hungry, but the context was all wrong. Xyler took a tentative taste. It was bland but warm. He ate, as did Lyra. Kale kept his weapon up with 3 of his hands, using the 4th to awkwardly scoop the food into his mouth. As they ate, one of the shriekers, bolder than the rest, let out a piercing cry from a branch just above their clearing. It was a sound like grinding metal filled with malice. Kale leaped to his feet, aiming his weapon into the dark canopy. Alex didn't move. He just tilted his head back and shouted, "Hey, we're trying to eat down here. Have some damn courtesy." There was a rustle of leaves and the shrieking moved further away. Alex took another bite of his mush. "See, they're just rude." Kale slowly lowered his weapon, his entire body thrumming with a mixture of adrenaline and sheer disbelief. Lyra stared at Alex, her analytical mind trying to create a psychological profile that could explain this behavior and failing completely. Xyler felt a strange sensation, one he couldn't identify. It was a dawning realization that the most dangerous thing in this clearing might not be in the trees, but sitting calmly by the fire, eating oatmeal. The next morning, Alex was up before the twin suns of Xylos had crested the horizon. The Cathar awoke stiffly from a restless, huddled sleep to find him already tending the fire and examining a crude map he'd sketched on a piece of slate. Morning, he grunted, not looking up. Sleep well? We did not sleep, Kale said flatly. We maintained a state of high alert. Right. Well, today's agenda is shelter and food, Alex announced, pointing a finger at his map. The crash site is too exposed. I found a rock outcropping about half a kilometer that way. He pointed into the dense, violet foliage. It's got a decent overhang. With a bit of work we can make it a defensible position. But first, food. The rations won't last forever. Xyler stood, trying to stretch the stiffness from his slender limbs. What do you propose? We have no knowledge of the local fauna's edibility. That's what we're going to find out, Alex said cheerfully. Time to set some traps. He led them away from the camp, moving through the undergrowth with a quiet confidence that baffled the aliens. He pointed out things along the way. See this vine? The thorns are coated in a neurotoxin. Don't touch it, that big, pretty flower, carnivorous. It'll snap shut on anything that gets too close. And whatever you do, don't step on the yellow moss. Spores are a mild hallucinogen. Fun at a party, less so when you're being hunted. Each warning was delivered with the same dry, informative tone, as if he were a tour guide pointing out local attractions. For the Cathar, it was a litany of death. Every step was fraught with peril. They followed him in a tight, nervous cluster. Alex stopped at a narrow game trail, a path worn through the spongy ground by the passage of unseen creatures. He knelt, examining the tracks. Okay, something four-legged, about the size of a large dog on my world, comes through here regularly. Herbivore, judging by the scat. Good. Herbivores are usually less likely to be poisonous. He pulled a coil of thin, incredibly strong microfilament wire from his pack. He then began to weave it between two sturdy-looking trees, fashioning a complex snare. His hands moved with practiced dexterity, a dance of knots and loops that was both fascinating and deeply primitive to the Cathar, whose people relied on molecular fabricators for all their needs. This is a simple tension snare, Alex explained as he worked. The creature walks through, trips the line, and the stored energy in this bent sapling will hoist it into the air, keeps it away from ground scavengers. Clean, efficient. As he was anchoring the final knot, the jungle erupted. It wasn't the roar of the grave maw or the cry of a shrieker. It was a cacophony of panicked squeals and deep, guttural growls, culminating in a wet, tearing sound that spoke of a successful hunt. It was close, too close. The Cathar froze, their skin flashing with raw terror. Kale raised his weapon, spinning around, trying to locate the source of the sound. Lyra huddled behind Xyler, her body trembling. Alex sighed, a long, put-upon sound. He slowly rose to his feet and peered in the direction of the noise. Sounds like the shriekers got one of the grazers. Good for them. Saves us the trouble of hunting one. He turned back to his snare. Now where was I? Ah, yes. The trigger mechanism needs to be sensitive, but not too sensitive. Xyler finally found his voice. A creature was just violently killed less than 100 paces from us, and your only reaction is to critique its effect on your own hunting prospects. Alex looked at him, a genuinely puzzled expression on his face. What else am I supposed to do? Go over there and file a complaint with the Shrieker Union. That's just the sound of the universe working as intended. Something lives, something dies, something else eats. It's the great circle of oh crap run. He gave his snare a final tug. There, 1 down, 3 to go. He spent the next hour setting more traps, a deadfall trap using a heavy, petrified log. A pit trap lined with sharpened stakes, carefully camouflaged with leaves. To the Cathar, he was a merchant of death, calmly and methodically weaving lethality into the fabric of the jungle. It was chilling. Once the traps were set, he led them to the rock outcropping. It was a large slab of black, igneous rock that jutted out from a hillside, creating a natural shelter. All right, Alex said, clapping his hands together. Home sweet home. Kale, you're on watch. Stand over there, try to look intimidating. Xyler, Lyra, we need to clear this space and build a wall. We'll use woven branches and mud. It won't stop a grave maw, but it will deter the smaller, more curious things. The work was hard. The Cathar, accustomed to a life of intellectual pursuit and technological convenience, were not built for manual labor. Their 4 slender arms, so adept at manipulating complex interfaces, were clumsy when it came to hauling rocks and weaving thick, fibrous branches. Alex worked alongside them, never complaining, just doing. He showed them how to strip branches, how to mix the silty soil with water to make a crude mortar, how to weave a lattice that was surprisingly strong. By late afternoon, they had a low, semicircular wall enclosing the space under the overhang, with a single, defensible entrance. They were exhausted, covered in alien mud, and their fine uniforms were in tatters. But for the first time, they had a place that felt marginally less terrifying than the open jungle. A piercing whistle from one of Alex's traps echoed through the trees. "Dinner," Alex said with a grin. He grabbed his spear and knife. "Stay here. Keep the fire going." He returned 20 minutes later, dragging the carcass of a creature that looked like a cross between a six-legged deer and an armadillo. It was hanging from a pole, its life ended by a single, precise spear thrust to the neck. He dropped it in the center of their new camp. The Cathar stared at the dead thing. Its large, black eyes were glassy. A trickle of dark blue blood dripped from its snout onto the ground. This was food. Not a sterile nutrient bar, but a life that had been violently extinguished. Alex noticed their expressions. He wiped his knife clean on a leaf. "Look, I know this is probably a bit much for you, but this is survival. This animal's death means we live for another few days. We honor its sacrifice by not wasting any of it." He then proceeded to butcher the animal with an efficiency that was both horrifying and mesmerizing. He skinned it, gutted it, and began carving up the meat. Lyra, her scientific curiosity overriding her revulsion, crept closer. "Its internal organ structure is fascinating," she murmured. "Two hearts and a redundant respiratory system. This creature was built for endurance." "Built to run," Alex corrected, tossing a slab of dark meat onto a flat rock he'd placed near the fire. "Just not fast enough." The smell of roasting meat soon filled the air. It was a rich, savory aroma, completely alien to the Cathar, yet it stirred a primal hunger within them they hadn't known they possessed. Just as the meat began to sizzle, the grave maw roared, closer than ever before. It was a sound of pure, elemental fury, a sound that promised annihilation. The ground itself seemed to vibrate with it. Kale stumbled back against the rock wall, his skin a flashing beacon of pure panic. "We are all going to die," he trilled. Alex didn't even look up from the fire where he was turning the meat with a stick. He just shook his head and chuckled. "What?" Xyler demanded, his voice strained. "What could possibly be amusing at this moment?" Alex looked at the three terrified aliens, their advanced minds completely short-circuited by primal fear. He gestured at the roasting meat with his stick, then at the menacing darkness beyond their wall. "On Earth," he said, his voice laced with that infuriating dry wit, "we call this barbecue season." He met Xyler's eyes, and for the first time the Cathar saw a flicker of something truly dangerous behind the human's calm facade. "The trick is not being the main course." Xyler stared at the human, then at the cooking meat, then back at the human. The statement was so profoundly insane, so utterly detached from the reality of their situation, that it broke through his fear and left him in a state of pure, unadulterated bewilderment. This human didn't just survive in a death world. He brought his own condiments. The meal was a silent, tense affair. The Cathar ate the roasted meat, driven by a hunger that was now undeniable. It was rich, gamey, and delicious in a way that nutrient paste could never be. But each bite was a reminder of the dead creature, of the violence Alex had so casually inflicted, and the greater violence that lurked just beyond their flickering fire. After they had eaten their fill, Alex packed the remaining meat in salt he'd salvaged from his supplies. "Waste not, want not," he'd said, as if quoting some ancient, folksy wisdom. Now he sat, sharpening his knife on a smooth stone, the rhythmic scrape a counterpoint to the jungle's unsettling symphony. Xyler finally had to ask the question that had been circling in his mind since their first encounter. "Alex," he began, his translator making his tone sound more formal than he intended. "I must understand, we are Cathar. Our history spans 200 millennia. We have engineered our society to eliminate want, to mitigate all risk. We view the universe as a complex system to be understood and, where necessary, controlled. What I am witnessing in you, it is not in any of our psychological models for sentient behavior." Alex paused his sharpening. He looked into the fire, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. "You see the universe as a system to be controlled. We see it as a storm to be weathered, that's the difference. But you seem to take pleasure in it, Lyra interjected, her voice soft. "The challenge, the danger. It does not seem to merely be a matter of survival for you. There is a relish." Alex considered this for a moment. "It's not about pleasure, it's about focus. When you're trying to figure out if the rustle in the leaves is a predator or just the wind, you're not worrying about your taxes or what you said at that party 3 years ago. All the little anxieties, all the noise of a complex life, it all just goes away. There's only one problem to solve: stay alive until sunrise. It's simple, clean." He picked up his knife and tested the edge with his thumb. "My species spent most of its history as prey. We were small and weak and slow. We weren't the strongest, we weren't the fastest. So we had to be the smartest, the meanest, and the most stubborn sons of bitches in the valley. We learned to make fire, not just for warmth, but to burn our enemies out of their caves. We learned to sharpen sticks, not just to dig for roots, but to drive into the hearts of things that wanted to eat our children." He looked up, and his eyes met Zyler's. "You eliminated risk from your lives. We embraced it. We made it our greatest tool. We learned to look at a monster, and instead of just seeing teeth and claws, we learned to see a challenge. We learned to see dinner." The concept was so fundamentally alien to the Cathar that it took them a moment to process. Their evolution had been a journey away from brutality. The humans had been a journey through it, mastering it, and making it a part of their very identity. "So you are not insane," Kale stated, more to himself than to anyone else. It was the first thing he'd said in over an hour. Alex laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Oh, by your standards, I'm probably stark raving mad, but by the standards of this place," he gestured to the jungle, "I'm just well-adjusted." Their philosophical discussion was cut short by a new sound. It was a low, rhythmic thudding, heavy and deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of immense weight moving with purpose. Alex was on his feet in an instant, his casual demeanor gone, replaced by a cold, predatory focus. He held a hand up for silence. "Gravemaw," he whispered. "It's patrolling, looking for the shriekers that stole its kill earlier." The thudding grew louder, closer. It was circling their camp. The ground vibrated with each footstep. Peering over their low wall, they could see the effect of its passage. Small trees swayed and snapped. The lesser sounds of the jungle had gone utterly silent. Even the insects had stopped chirping. "Do not make a sound," Alex breathed, his voice barely audible. "Its eyesight is probably poor based on the sounds it makes. It likely hunts by scent and vibration." Kale's skin was a riot of flashing red lights. He was trembling so hard his armor plates rattled softly. Lyra was frozen, her scientific mind finally overwhelmed by pure animal terror. Zyler felt his own 4 hands clench and unclench. He could feel his hearts, both of them, hammering against his ribs. A massive, shadowy head rose above the tree line not 40 paces away. It was wider than Alex was tall. 2 clusters of small, red eyes glowed faintly in the gloom. It sniffed the air, a sound like a great, leaky bellows. Its head was a nightmare of armored plates and bony ridges. It opened its mouth, and though it made no sound, they could see rows upon rows of teeth, each the size of a Cathar's forearm. It took a step closer. The wall they had built with such effort now seemed like a line of pebbles. Alex slowly, silently, reached for the heavy spear he had made, the one with the fire-hardened, obsidian-like tip. He didn't look ready to fight the creature. He looked ready to die trying, and to take a piece of it with him. His face was a mask of grim determination. This was the other side of his casual wit. This was the meanest son of a bitch in the valley. The Gravemaw lowered its head, its glowing eyes fixing on their shelter. It knew they were there. It let out a low growl, a rumble that felt like the planet itself clearing its throat. It was toying with them. Then Alex did something that defied all logic. He took a deep breath, and he roared back. It wasn't a sound of defiance or courage. It was a perfect, chilling mimicry of the Gravemaw's own territorial roar, pitched lower, guttural, and full of a savage promise of violence. It was the sound of a competing predator. A sound that said, "This is my territory. This is my food. Come closer and you will bleed." For a moment the entire jungle was silent. The Gravemaw froze, its massive head tilted. It had been challenged. From its perspective, something small, hidden in the rocks, had just declared itself an equal. The sheer, audacious bluff was incomprehensible. The monster stared at their shelter for a long, agonizing minute. It considered the challenge. It weighed the potential cost of a fight for what was likely meager prey against the energy it would expend. It let out one final, frustrated snort that flattened the nearby ferns. Then, with a slow, ponderous movement, it turned and lumbered away. The heavy thudding of its footsteps gradually receded into the darkness. Silence returned to the clearing, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the ragged, desperate gasps of the three Cathar. Alex slowly let out the breath he'd been holding. He leaned against the rock wall, sweat beading on his forehead. The mask of the apex predator fell away, leaving behind the weary human. "Never," he said, his voice raspy, "let them see you're scared." Xyler stared at him, his mind reeling. The human had not used a weapon. He had not used technology. He had faced down a monster the size of a shuttlecraft with nothing but his voice and an understanding of predatory psychology so deep it was practically instinctual. You reasoned with it," Lyra stammered. "No," Alex said, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I spoke its language, the language of violence. I told it that getting to us would hurt. Most predators are lazy. They want an easy meal, not a fight that could leave them injured and vulnerable. I just made myself sound like I would be a very, very unpleasant meal." He looked at their pale, shimmering forms. "Get some rest. It won't be back tonight. It'll go looking for something that doesn't roar back." They did not rest. They sat up all night, watching the human as he banked the fire and settled into a light, watchful sleep. They were safe. They were fed. But they were more terrified than ever before. Their fear was no longer of the jungle's monsters, but of the nature of the creature that was protecting them from it. A creature that could, with nothing but its own biology and will, declare itself king of this nightmare landscape. A creature for whom the line between survivor and monster was terrifyingly, functionally, non-existent. They were beginning to understand that humans hadn't just survived their hostile homeworld. They had become its most perfect expression. For the next 5 days, a routine was established. It was a routine dictated by Alex, grounded in the brutal pragmatism of survival. Each morning began with a perimeter check and a resetting of the traps. Then came the day's main labor: improving the shelter, gathering clean water, finding edible plants under Alex's cautious guidance. Lyra became his unlikely apprentice. Her scientific training made her a quick study. She cataloged the flora, her initial revulsion replaced by a deep, academic fascination. She learned to distinguish the nutritious tubers from the poisonous ones, the leaves that could be used as bandages from those that caused severe rashes. "The biodiversity here is astounding," she remarked one afternoon, carefully examining a glowing fungus. "On a properly equipped expedition, this world would be a treasure trove of biological discovery. Right now, it's a treasure trove of ways to die," Alex grunted, splitting logs with a wedge and a heavy stone. "But I see your point. It is pretty." Kale, meanwhile, found a new purpose. He was no match for the grave maw, but his energy weapon was more than sufficient for the shriekers. Alex taught him how to think like a hunter, not just a guard. To watch for movement in the canopy, to listen for the specific cadence of their calls, to anticipate their flanking maneuvers. Kale, to his own surprise, excelled at it. The fear was still there, a constant thrum beneath his carapace, but it was now honed, focused. He became the guardian of their small camp, his 4 arms and keen eyes a constant patrol. Xyler observed it all, his role as a diplomat utterly useless. He was a creature of words and protocols in a world that only respected strength and cunning. He helped with the labor, hauling rocks and mixing mud, but his mind was constantly working, trying to reconcile the human before him with the data the Cathar Concordance had gathered on humanity. They'd watched from afar, of course. They had seen the humans' chaotic societies, their endless conflicts, their seemingly self-destructive tendencies. The consensus among the Concordants was that humanity was a volatile, primitive species, a potential threat that was best observed from a safe distance. They were considered clever but fundamentally broken, a species at war with itself and its environment. Now, Xyler saw that they had completely misinterpreted the data. It wasn't a war with their environment, it was a dance. A deadly, intimate dance they had been practicing for millennia. Their chaos wasn't a flaw, it was the source of their terrifying adaptability. A Cathar, faced with an unsolvable problem, would retreat, analyze, and seek a logical, risk-free solution. A human, Xyler now understood, would pick up a sharp rock and run screaming at the problem until one of them was dead. One evening, as Alex was smoking strips of meat to preserve them, Xyler approached him. The camp was now a small fortress. The wall was higher, reinforced with sharpened stakes. A second, smaller fire was kept burning at the entrance all night. "I have been reviewing my memories of our first contact," Xyler began. "You were not surprised to see us." Alex draped another strip of meat over the smoking rack. "I saw your ship go down, figured I'd have company sooner or later. But you identified us as Cathar. And I recall you made a comment, a species of janitors. That implies a pre-existing knowledge of our culture." Alex stopped what he was doing and turned to face Xyler. He leaned against the rock wall, his face half in shadow. "We've known about you for a while, the Concordance, the Galactic Council, all of it. We've been listening in. You broadcast everything on open channels, you know, very trusting." Xyler's skin went a pale, shocked white. "You have achieved interstellar communication, and FTL travel. Our probes of your system showed only primitive chemical rockets." "We're good at hiding things," Alex said with a shrug. "It's another survival trait. We learned a long time ago not to draw the attention of the bigger kids on the playground until we were ready. Your probes saw what we wanted them to see. Old broadcasts, obsolete tech. We call it the rickety front porch strategy. Nobody bothers the crazy old coot on the dilapidated porch because you assume he's got nothing worth stealing." The revelation was staggering. Humanity was not the pre-FTL primitive they had been cataloged as. They were a hidden interstellar power, watching, listening, and judging. "Why?" Xyler asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why hide your capabilities?" "Because we've seen what happens to species that announce themselves to the galaxy," Alex said, his voice hardening slightly. "They get absorbed or exploited or wiped out. We looked at the Concordance and the other great powers, and we saw societies that had grown soft. Peaceful, yes. Advanced, absolutely. But soft. You've forgotten what it's like to have teeth, let alone how to use them. We haven't. We figured it was better to be underestimated. Better to let everyone think we were just loud, dangerous monkeys flinging things at each other on our little mudball, until we understood the rules of the game." He pushed himself off the wall and walked to the edge of the firelight, looking out into the oppressive darkness. This is a final exam. Any species that can't survive a week here without advanced tech has no business playing on the galactic stage. It's a filter. You landed in the middle of our filter." The full weight of what Alex was saying settled on Xyler. This wasn't just a random death world. It was a crucible, and Alex wasn't just a survivor, he was a gatekeeper. "So your presence here, it is not an accident?" Xyler asked. "My crash was an accident," Alex clarified. "My presence on a world like this is my job. I'm an exobiologist with the Ecological Survey Corps. My specialty is Class G death worlds. I study them. I learn their rules. I figure out how to survive in them. It's my species' way of doing our homework before the big test." A shrieker cried out in the distance, and this time none of the Cathar even flinched. The sound was still menacing, but it had lost its power over them. The true monster, the truly incomprehensible force, was standing right here in their camp, calmly explaining how his entire species thought like he did. On the 10th day, Lyra's rebuilt scanner, cobbled together from salvaged parts, picked up a signal. It was faint but unmistakable. A Cathar emergency beacon, likely from a life pod ejected before the crash. "The trajectory indicates it landed beyond that ridge," she said, pointing to a line of jagged hills on the horizon, about a day's travel away. "If its long-range comms are intact, we could be rescued." Hope, a feeling they hadn't dared to indulge, surged through the Cathar. But their hope was immediately tempered by a new reality. Between them and the ridge lay 10 kilometers of the deadliest terrain they had ever seen. "The path will take us through the Gravemaw's primary hunting ground," Alex said, studying the map Lyra had projected onto a flat stone. "Open ground, swampland, we won't have the high ground or a defensible position. We'll be exposed the entire time." "But we must try," Xyler insisted. "It is our only chance." Alex looked at the three of them. He saw the desperation in their eyes. He had kept them alive. He had fed them and protected them. But he hadn't given them hope for anything beyond the next sunrise. He owed them that. "All right," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "But we're not going to try to sneak through its territory. That's a prey animal's move." "What do you propose?" Kale asked, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. Alex's smile widened. It was a chilling sight. "We're going to go hunting." The next 24 hours were a blur of focused, terrifying activity. Alex was no longer a survivalist. He was a general planning a campaign. The mission was not to kill the grave maw. That, he explained, would be nearly impossible and incredibly stupid. The mission was to wound it, to drive it out of the territory long enough for them to pass through. He and Lyra worked on a chemical compound using her knowledge of the local flora and his practical experience. They found a plant with sap that was a powerful paralytic neurotoxin, and another whose berries, when crushed, created a highly volatile, flammable oil. They mixed them into a sticky paste. Alex, meanwhile, took the strongest of the silicon-based wood and fashioned several large, javelin-like spears. He carefully coated the tips with the toxic, flammable paste. Kale was given the task of creating a diversion. He was to take a position on a high ledge overlooking the swampy plains and use his energy weapon to draw the grave maw's attention, to make it angry and careless. "You want me to deliberately provoke it?" Kale asked, his skin flickering with a pale green of unease. "I want you to piss it off," Alex corrected. "Make it focus on you, but don't stay in one place for too long. You're the distraction, not the bait." Zyler's job was perhaps the most crucial. He was to be the lure. He would use a salvaged piece of the Stellara's hull as a massive noisemaker, banging on it to simulate a wounded animal, drawing the grave maw into a narrow ravine that Alex had selected as their kill zone. "This plan is predicated on a dozen variables we cannot control," Zyler stated, his logical mind rebelling against the sheer, reckless audacity of it all. "It is statistically likely to fail." "Welcome to being human," Alex replied, checking the balance of a finished javelin. "We call it improvising. Now let's go over the plan one more time." They set out at dawn. The jungle felt different now. They moved not as prey but as predators on the hunt. They were still afraid, but it was a cold, sharp fear, not the debilitating panic of their first days. It was the fear of the hunter who knows their quarry is far more dangerous than they are. They reached the edge of the plains as the twin suns reached their zenith. The air was still and heavy. Alex gave the signal. Kale scrambled up the rock face to his perch. Zyler took his position at the mouth of the ravine, the piece of metal in his hands. Alex and Lyra concealed themselves on the ledges inside the ravine, the deadly javelins laid out beside them. Zyler took a deep breath and began to bang on the metal. Clang, dong, clang. The sound was jarring, unnatural. It echoed across the silent plains. He felt utterly exposed, a tiny, fragile creature calling a demon to its door. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the ground began to tremble. In the distance, a line of trees swayed and then fell, as if pushed over by an invisible giant. The grave maw was coming. Kale opened fire. Bright lances of energy slammed into the creature's armored flank as it emerged onto the plain. They didn't penetrate, but they hissed and sparked, leaving scorched marks. The grave maw roared in fury, its attention immediately drawn to the annoying sting from the cliffs. It charged toward Kale's position. "Now, Zyler, now!" Alex's voice came over the short-range comm. Zyler banged on the metal again, a frantic, desperate rhythm. It was the sound of something large, metallic, and dying. The grave maw, enraged and seeing an easier target, changed course, veering toward the ravine. It came on like an avalanche, a moving mountain of muscle and armored plates. Zyler scrambled back into the ravine just as the monster's massive head appeared at the entrance. It was bigger up close than he could have ever imagined. Its maw opened, and a stench like 1,000 rotting graves washed over him. Then Alex and Lyra struck. From the ledges above, the javelins rained down. They were too light to pierce the thickest armor on its back and head, but several found their mark in the softer joints of its legs and neck. The creature bellowed in pain and confusion. "Now!" Alex yelled. Kale fired again, not at the creature, but at the tip of the javelin lodged in the grave maw's shoulder. The energy beam struck the flammable paste. The effect was instantaneous. The paste ignited with a concussive whoomp, a searing flash of chemical fire. The neurotoxin, vaporized by the heat, was inhaled by the beast. The grave maw shrieked, a sound of pure agony, and stumbled back. It thrashed its head, its small red eyes wild with pain and the creeping effects of the poison. It could no longer tell where the attack was coming from. The small things in the rocks were fighting back with fire and poison, a kind of cunning it had never encountered. It was wounded, it was confused, and it was no longer the undisputed king of this territory. With one last, hate-filled roar at the ravine, it turned and fled, crashing through the jungle in a blind, pained panic. They had done it. They had faced the monster and won. They stood, breathing heavily, covered in sweat and grime in the sudden, echoing silence. Alex jumped down from his ledge, a look of fierce, primal satisfaction on his face. He clapped Xyler on the shoulder. "See, not so tough." The journey to the beacon was blessedly uneventful. The lesser predators gave them a wide berth. They carried the scent of the grave maw's blood and the ozone of energy weapons. They smelled of victory. They smelled like something you didn't mess with. They found the life pod in a small crater, its systems miraculously intact. Within an hour, Xyler had made contact with a Cathar patrol vessel. Rescue was on its way. As they waited, sitting around one last fire, a strange quiet fell over the group. Their ordeal was almost over. Soon they would be back in the clean, sterile, safe world of the Concordance. "Our official report will have to be edited," Xyler said, looking at Alex. "The Concordance is not ready to learn that humanity is an interstellar power that views our entire civilization as soft." "Probably a good idea," Alex agreed. "No need to start a panic." "When we are rescued," Lyra asked, her voice filled with a new kind of respect, "will you come with us?" Alex shook his head. "My ship's repairable. I'll get it flying in a week or two. Besides," he looked out at the alien jungle, now bathed in the soft light of the rising moons, "I haven't finished my survey yet. I still don't know what hunts the grave maws." The Cathar stared at him. After everything they had been through, after facing down the most terrifying creature they had ever seen, his first thought was to wonder what could possibly be more dangerous. The Cathar rescue ship was a vision of grace and technological perfection. It descended without a sound, its landing field bathed in a soft, welcoming light. Ramps extended, and Cathar medics in clean, white uniforms came bustling out. Xyler, Lyra, and Kale stood to greet them. They were dirty, their uniforms were ruined, and they were covered in scratches and bruises, but they stood taller than before. The flickering anxiety that had once dominated their skin was gone, replaced by a calm, steady azure. One of the medics rushed toward Xyler. "Diplomat, are you injured? We must get you to the medical bay immediately." Xyler held up a hand. "We are unharmed." He turned and looked back at Alex, who was leaning against a tree, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with a detached amusement. "Our survival is owed to him, the human." The rescue team looked at Alex, this strange, primitive-looking creature in his rough clothes. They saw the knife on his belt and the spear in his hand. They looked at him with suspicion and confusion. Xyler walked over to Alex. He stood before the human, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. The Cathar had no words for the kind of gratitude he felt, a gratitude mixed with a profound and lasting sense of unease. "The universe is not a system to be controlled," Xyler said, repeating Alex's words. "It is a storm to be weathered." "You're a fast learner," Alex said with a small smile. "I have had an excellent teacher," Xyler replied. He hesitated, then extended one of his 4 hands. Alex took it in his own, and they shook. It was a gesture Alex had taught him, a human custom of sealing a pact. As Xyler turned to board the ship, he looked back one last time. Alex was still there, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the savage, beautiful jungle. He gave them a final, lazy wave, then turned and disappeared back into the trees, a man perfectly at home in a world that should have killed him 100 times over. Aboard the ship, wrapped in clean robes and drinking sterilized nutrient fluid, the 3 Cathar looked out the viewport as Xylos dwindled behind them. "He chose to stay," Kale said, his voice full of wonder. "He is cataloging," Lyra corrected softly. "He has work to do." Xyler stared at the green and violet jewel of the planet. He thought of Alex, somewhere down there, happily searching for a bigger monster. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that the Cathar Concordance had been wrong about humanity. They weren't a chaotic, self-destructive species. They were a force of nature, honed by a hostile world into the ultimate survivors. And Xyler knew that the quiet, controlled galaxy they had built for themselves was not ready for barbecue season. Not yet.